She waited tables like she was carrying the weight of the world in her hands, slept little, smiled out of politeness, and was ignored by everyone who thought humility was the same as failure. Harlow Dunn faced life with silence, hard work, and faith, supporting her younger sister, taking care of a sick father, and enduring daily humiliation at a fancy restaurant where no one even knew her name. Until the night she accidentally dropped a plate right in front of the most powerful man in the room. Everyone expected the worst, but what happened that night flipped the course of her destiny. An unexpected, quiet, and unforgettable twist would turn that invisible waitress into someone no one ever imagined she could be. Harlow Dunn wasn't the kind of person who drew attention, not because of her clothes, or her soft voice, or her hunched posture, a result of too many hours balancing trays and glasses while hiding the exhaustion. She was the silent shadow weaving through the glowing tables of Finch and Willow, a high-end restaurant in the heart of Dallas. There, between spotless tablecloths and demanding clients, she moved with the precision of someone who knew that even the smallest mistake could cost her everything she had left. To most, she was just the tray girl. But if you looked closer, there was a heavy secret in her eyes, the kind only life teaches through scars. Her story didn't start with luxury or easy choices. Born in Honey Grove, a town most maps had forgotten, Harlow grew up with her dad, a good-hearted truck driver, and her little sister, Amelia, who was just 12. When their mother passed away, Harlow gave up her dream of studying psychology and stepped into a world of responsibilities too heavy for her fragile shoulders. She was barely old enough to vote, but already had every pharmacy price memorized, knew all her father's exam dates. He had been diagnosed with aggressive kidney failure and helped Amelia with her schoolwork. Everyone has a mission in life. This one's mine, she'd whisper to herself on the days when pain hit harder than hope. Her only moment to breathe was during the bus ride between work and home. It passed through wealthy neighborhoods she wouldn't dare walk into if not wearing a uniform. She'd watch the imported cars, the women in designer heels, the men with heavy watches, and wonder what it was like to live without being afraid of overdue bills. But she never envied them. Harlow had something that kept her grounded, even on nights when she went home without dinner. Faith. A small, quiet kind of faith. The kind that doesn't shout but whispers, "Keep going." Inside the restaurant, everything had to be perfect. The dim lights created a sophisticated mood, and the waitstaff spoke in low voices like they were performing on stage. Harlow was good at her job, not because she loved it, but because she had no choice. She never let a glass go empty, never left a napkin out of place, never got an order wrong. Even so, she couldn't avoid the side eyes, the impatient clients, or the rude remarks disguised as jokes. If you knew how to serve properly, you wouldn't be stuck in that ugly uniform, someone once told her. She swallowed hard. Humiliation became part of the routine, but she had learned to turn pain into silence. The manager, Mr. Whitmore, was the kind of man who judged people by appearances. And to him, Harlow was worth very little. Not because she was bad at her job, but because she didn't smile enough, didn't have big city charm, or the look for VIP guests. Anytime something went wrong, she took the blame, and she never argued back. She'd rather stay quiet than lose her job. That paycheck paid for her father's treatment, and no one else knew that. It was the kind of secret no one ever asked about, because no one cared. Even on nights when her body begged for rest, she kept going. She covered for sick coworkers, picked up extra shifts, and took on tasks that weren't hers. When the exhaustion became too much, she'd close her eyes for just a second in the break room and whisper to herself, "I can't give up now." It was almost like a prayer, a way to remind herself that all of it, the fatigue, the silence, the humiliation, had a purpose. That maybe, just maybe, there was a lesson behind it all, hidden beneath the weight of her daily struggle. No one there knew her full name. Some called her Miss, others forgot she even existed. But Harlow never cared much about that. What really hurt was realizing that even when she gave her best, it was like she didn't exist. Just another shadow gliding through a fancy dining room. A human accessory in a room designed to impress the rich. There were days she wished she could disappear altogether. But then she'd remember Amelia, waiting at home with her notebook open and a sticky note on the fridge that read, "Good night, sis. Love you." Harlow stayed distant from customers, not out of fear, but for protection. Life had already taught her that the less you're noticed, the less you get hurt. Still, there was something about her presence that caught the attention of those who paid attention. A quiet dignity, a steady look in her eyes, a softness in her movements, like she was saying, "I'm here, not because of you, but despite you." It was a kind of grace that couldn't be bought with money. It was earned. It was scarred into her. On one of those lonely early mornings, Harlow lay staring at the ceiling of the tiny room she shared with her sister and wondered what it would feel like to be truly seen. Not as a waitress, but as a human being. Someone who, despite everything falling apart, chose to keep moving forward. She had no way of knowing that, very soon, everything would change. A tray would slip, a plate would break, and a millionaire, whose name she didn't even know, would rewrite her story forever. And that's exactly how it all began. That night felt different, heavier. Finch and Willow, always filled with politicians, investors, and local celebrities, was hosting a corporate gala put together by some of the biggest names in real estate. The lights were brighter, security was tighter, and the waitstaff panicked. Everyone knew the rules. One wrong move, one drop of wine, one slip of a tray, and it could all come crashing down. For Harlow, it was just another shift where she needed to be flawless or invisible. But sometimes, fate likes to test the humble right in front of those who show the least mercy. She was already on her fourth shift in a row when the tray started to shake. Sweaty hands, muscle fatigue, and a freshly polished floor made the inevitable happen. The plate slipped, twirled in the air for what felt like an eternity, and shattered on the floor with a sharp, echoing crack that silenced the entire room. Harlow froze. Every guest turned toward her as if they'd just witnessed a crime. But the worst part? That plate, that specific plate, had landed at the feet of Cole Braxton, the guest of honor that night. A millionaire known for his cold demeanor, ruthless investments, and zero tolerance for mistakes. Cole slowly lifted his eyes. Around him, the laughter began, first cautious, then shameless. One executive leaned over and muttered, "Welcome to the disaster show." Another, drink in hand, joked loudly, "If she moved as fast as she drops plates, maybe we'd get our champagne without the drama." The humiliation hit Harlow like a cold wind across her face, and she couldn't move. She just lowered her eyes and whispered, barely audible, "I'm sorry, sir." Mr. Whitmore, the manager, didn't miss the chance. Like a vulture sensing weakness, he appeared out of nowhere and started yelling in front of everyone. "Again, Harlow? Again. I can't believe you're still working here. This is unacceptable." With every word, a piece of Harlow's dignity fell to the floor alongside the broken plate. She didn't defend herself, because in that cruel setup, the one in the uniform is always the one to blame. What she didn't know was that she was about to learn the biggest lesson of her life. But right then, she just wanted to disappear. Some waiters exchanged awkward glances, but no one dared step in. The room was heavy with judgment, and nobody wanted to risk their job for a mere waitress. That's how they saw her, disposable, invisible. And the cruelest part? They all acted like it was normal. No one questioned the tone, no one questioned the abuse. They just watched, laughed, and returned to their expensive meals, as if she were part of the decor. Broken. Harlow crouched down to pick up the pieces with her bare hands, even knowing she could get cut. It was instinct, the reflex of someone who's learned that if you don't clean up your own pain, no one else will. Her hands were shaking, but her breathing was steady. She'd been through worse. Hunger, rejection, being forgotten. But being humiliated like that, in front of everyone, with no one on her side, that hurt in a different way. And no matter how much she tried to shield herself, that kind of humiliation cut like a knife. In the midst of the chaos, the millionaire's silence became deafening. Everyone was waiting for his reaction. Some hoped he'd lash out. Others expected him to get up and walk out. After all, who would tolerate being the target of such an unforgivable accident? That's what they whispered over glasses of wine. He's going to have her fired. right in front of everyone. Just wait. And maybe they would have been right if Cole Braxton had been like them. She didn't look at him. She couldn't. Not because of the plate, but because of the shame of letting all the blame fall on her again. It was always like that. No one asked if she was overwhelmed, if she was in pain, if she'd slept at all. They just judged and punished. And even with her heart aching, Harlow stayed put. Dignified, upright, unaware that in that exact moment, something was about to shift. Cole leaned forward slightly. His eyes scanned every detail of the scene. The humiliated waitress, the red-faced manager, the guests hungry for drama. And then, finally, he spoke. What he said silenced the room like a thunderclap. Right there, in the middle of the shattered glass, the shame and the stunned faces, the story changed. Because sometimes, all it takes is one sentence to turn everything upside down. It wasn't her fault. The words sliced through the room like a blade, cutting straight through the fake laughter, the silent cruelty, the smug judgment of people who thought they could do no wrong just because they wore expensive suits. The entire room froze. Cole Braxton's deep, steady voice made even the silverware pause midair. No one expected that. The logical response would have been outrage, disgust. But the millionaire, the one known for being ruthless and cold, had just given the first hint that not all rich men forget where they came from. Harlow stayed crouched, unsure if she had heard him right. The silence around her echoed in her chest like a second heartbeat. Cole stood up smoothly, adjusted the cuffs of his shirt, and looked straight at the manager. If anyone deserves to be reprimanded here, it's the person who overworks her and doesn't train her properly. Mr. Whitmore turned pale. He swallowed hard. For the first time, he had no words. And maybe, in that moment, he started to realize he had gone too far. But the damage was already done. When I was her age, I used to bust tables too. Cole continued, steady and clear. And I learned early on that a uniform says nothing about someone's character. The people who judge by appearances, they reveal more about themselves than the person they're judging. It was like every word he spoke knocked down a brick from the wall of hypocrisy that held that place together. The guests, once so confident, now stared into their drinks, trying to hide their discomfort. Because really, who enjoys looking in a mirror and seeing their own prejudice? Harlow didn't know whether to cry, smile, or crawl under the table. Never in all her shifts at that restaurant had anyone stood up for her, especially not a customer, let alone a millionaire. Cole Braxton, until then just a distant name, had just shut down a public humiliation with a simple, powerful truth. Dignity isn't measured by status, but by humanity. Someone clapped, hesitantly, then another, and suddenly the room was split between those who felt ashamed for laughing and those who, maybe for the first time, realized there was something seriously wrong with the way invisible people were treated. Cole wasn't looking for applause. He simply held out a handkerchief to Harlow and said softly, almost in a whisper, "Stand up. They need to see what courage looks like." And she stood, with trembling hands, teary eyes, but a posture that said she'd just been given a second chance, even if she didn't realize it yet. Mr. Whitmore tried to regain control. With all due respect, Mr. Braxton, this kind of display damages the image of the establishment. But Cole cut him off, sharp and calm. The image of this place is already damaged, and not because of her. That was the kind of answer no one expected from a man worth over $500 million. But Cole didn't act like the others. There was something in his eyes, an old pain, maybe, a memory that still stung in silence. Later, people would learn that Cole Braxton had started as a dishwasher in a roadside diner. His secret, tucked away behind tailored suits and corporate speeches, had just come out like an unplanned confession. "Don't let success make me seem different," he said. "I just got lucky. She's got the strength." And that moment wasn't just about Harlow. It was about everyone who's ever been quietly humiliated. Everyone who carries the weight of the world and still gets blamed for stumbling. Without saying a word, Harlow gently nodded her head in gratitude. A small gesture, but one that said more than 1,000 speeches ever could. Cole touched her shoulder with respect. No arrogance, no superiority. Just a human, honest, and simple gesture. And right there, In front of all the eyes that had judged her just moments before, Harlow began to feel that something more than humiliation had happened that night. A seed had been planted, a beginning, something she couldn't name yet, but that pulsed quietly in her chest like a whisper. Your life is about to change. And it would, when she least expected it. The restaurant was nearly empty when Harlow finished stacking the last chairs. The silence, once heavy and suffocating, now felt different, as if it carried a kind of anticipation she couldn't explain. The incident with the plate was already the talk among the staff. Some looked at her with admiration, others with jealousy. But she didn't want to be a hero. She just wanted to finish her shift, catch the bus, and hug her sister. That's when the security guard approached and said, "Mr. Braxton asked to see you outside." Her heart raced. She couldn't imagine why. Maybe it was just another act of pity disguised as kindness. Outside, the air was cold and the parking lot nearly empty. Cole stood leaning against a black SUV, composed and elegant, like someone who didn't mind waiting. When he saw her, he smiled softly, almost shyly. "Thanks for coming," he said. Harlow just nodded, still in her uniform, trying to hide her hands that were still trembling. "I wanted to apologize for all of them, and for everything you've had to put up with in silence." Her eyes widened. That was the last thing she expected to hear from a millionaire. "But I also wanted to make you an offer," he continued. He explained that he quietly funded a foundation dedicated to young people with potential but no opportunities. A full scholarship program, mentoring, and access to the financial world. Most people think talent lives in polished resumes. But I've learned talent lives in the ones who take hits and don't lose their soul. And you're one of them. Harlow felt her throat tighten. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. "I want to offer you a full scholarship in financial administration," he said, "everything paid. If you want it." Her first instinct was to say no. "I can't accept this. You don't know me. There must be someone more qualified." But he didn't back down. "You know what winners have in common? They say yes, even when they're scared." She bit her lower lip quietly. No one had ever seen her like that before. "Accepting help isn't weakness, Harlow. It's courage," Cole said gently. It was as if he knew exactly where the cracks were beneath her skin. And in that moment, she wanted to believe. Just once. That night, she went home in a daze. Her sister was asleep, a science book resting on her chest. Her father, in the next room, was breathing heavily. Harlow sat at the edge of her bed and cried. Cried for everything. For the humiliation. For the secret she had carried alone. For the lesson life had insisted on teaching the hard way. And most of all, for finally being chosen without having to hide. She would say yes. Not for herself, but for them. For her sister. For her father. For everyone who never got a chance. The next day, she handed in her resignation. Mr. Whitmore barely looked at her. He assumed it was just another burst of pride. "You'll regret this," he muttered. But Harlow just smiled. She didn't respond. Because, without knowing it, he had just confirmed she was doing the right thing. Soon, a new routine would begin. Classes in the morning, internship in the afternoon, and night split between homework and taking care of her family. It would be hard, but she knew what hard looked like. And she knew that when effort and faith walked together, they opened doors that once felt locked by invisible chains. Cole never treated her like a charity case. Not once. He always saw her as someone in the making. He guided her without judgment, explained without showing off. Little by little, Harlow began to change. Her posture, her voice, even the way she walked. She was no longer the hunched waitress hiding behind tables. She was a woman under construction. And there was something powerful about that, something no fancy uniform at Finch and Willow had ever given her, the certainty that she belonged. The tests came. So did the self-doubt. But she kept going. Every class was a battle. Every grade, a small victory. And somewhere between binders, spreadsheets, and project reports, Harlow started to stand out. Not because she was the smartest, but because she was the most persistent. What others had as natural talent, she made up for in raw effort. And that, more than any degree, caught the attention of people who truly knew how to see. And just like that, behind the scenes, without fanfare, Harlow Dunn went from invisible to indispensable. But the world hadn't seen the best of her yet. that return to the restaurant, this time as a customer, still held the most unforgettable moment of her story. 2 springs had passed. Time, which once felt like punishment, had now become her ally. Harlow Dunn no longer served tables. She now served young people with stories like hers, working on social projects funded by Cole Braxton's foundation. At 24, with a freshly earned degree and a position as a financial project assistant, she still carried the same humility in her chest, but now, paired with a strength no one dared to overlook. Her eyes, once timid, were focused. Her hands, once shaky, now held pens, contracts, and decisions. Still, there was one thing left undone: a quiet reckoning with her own past. She chose an ordinary night, no special event. Walked into Finch and Willow in a simple but elegant dark blue dress. Her steps were steady as she passed between the tables, like someone returning to a stage where she had once been a background player and was now the lead. A few familiar faces were still there: younger waiters, a new hostess, and 1 or 2 former co-workers who blinked, unsure if it was really her. But no one approached. After all, that woman looked like she came from a different world now. Only those who knew the backstage truth understood what that moment meant. She sat alone at the very same table where Cole had been served on that fateful night. She ordered a glass of white wine, a light appetizer, and watched in silence. The dining room looked the same: warm lighting, perfectly aligned silverware, and that same air of self-importance. But Harlow was no longer intimidated. Now, she saw the game from the inside. She knew who she was, and she didn't have to prove anything to anyone anymore. Still, in her hands, she held a small envelope and a handwritten note. It wasn't revenge. It was justice. It was dignity. At the end of the dinner, she quietly called over the young waitress who had served her kindly and handed her an envelope. "Can you give this to the manager, please?" The girl nodded. Harlow stood, grabbed her purse, and walked slowly toward the door. She didn't look back. She had spent enough time looking at the past. When the envelope was opened, it held a generous tip, far more than any table would have left that night, and a handwritten note. Never underestimate someone with calloused hands. Sometimes, they're the ones building the future. HD. In the back office, the new manager read those words in silence. And even without knowing who had left them, he felt a strange discomfort in his chest, like he'd just been taught a lesson that no service manual could ever offer. Word spread quickly among the staff. Was it her? They whispered. That girl who, and what had once been the butt of jokes, quietly turned into admiration. No spotlight, no speech, just truth. Cole Braxton heard about the visit the next day. He smiled. He knew she'd come back, not out of pride, but because people like Harlow don't just break plates. They break patterns. She had done far more than earn a degree. She had turned humiliation into wisdom, silence into strength, and pain into purpose. And now, she was changing lives quietly behind the scenes. Because her greatest wealth wasn't her job title, it was her story. On the way home, Harlow looked out the car window. The city lights shimmered differently now. Maybe because this time, she saw them from a new place. Beside her, a gift wrapped with a golden ribbon. It was for Amelia, who now dreamed of becoming a lawyer. Her father, back home, was breathing easier. And she, well, she was moving forward, with steady hands, a clear heart, and the certainty that sometimes what feels like the end is really just the first step in a comeback no one saw coming. A story about resilience, quiet strength, and a life-changing lessons hidden between the lines. Like this video if this story touched your heart. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories with emotional twists. Tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? We'd love to know.